In this video, I'm going to show you how to replace the front wheel hub bearing assembly on this Ford F-150. Let's get started. Let's remove the wheel. You would want to use a 21mm socket. If your lug nuts are swollen like mine, because underneath the chrome cap it rusted, you would want to use a 22. And remove the wheel. Now with the wheel off from the back side, you can see the caliper that we have to remove. There's also a vacuum hose here for the hub actuator. I'm going to want to pull that off the hub, so let's do that now. We need to get as much stuff out as possible to have room to bring the knuckle forward so we can get this axle out. If you have to, you can use a screwdriver, a pry bar, to help pry this up and off, just like that. Then with a 10mm socket, remove the retainer bolt for the bracket that holds the brake hose on. Pull this out of the knuckle and set it aside, and unclip the ABS wire from this. Let's also unbolt the ABS wire from the knuckle with an 8mm socket. If it feels like it's going to break, work it back and forth because you don't want this breaking inside the knuckle. I've already done this, but I'm going to spray it again with a bunch of rust penetrant. Hopefully that'll work its way in there and help me loosen this up a little bit easier and without breaking it. There it is. Pull this off. Follow the ABS wire up and unclip it from where it's secured onto the frame. Just like this. Follow it up even more. It's clipped right here next to the control arm. Remove it from this retainer as well. I'm going to follow the ABS sensor all the way up here on the fender liner and unplug it. There's a clip on the back side. Press it and slide it out of its connector. Okay, just pop it out. Oh, there we go. That's why it's not coming out. A lot of times these get pretty full of debris here. Now you can pull the wire down. Now have a bungee cord ready so you can tie the caliper and bracket assembly out of the way. We're taking off the whole thing as a unit. Take this 18mm bolt out, as well as this one down here. Those will take off the caliper bracket off of the knuckle directly. With one off, leave it on a few threads so that you can have the caliper supported while you take off the other one. Now take both off. Pull it off of the rotor. Remove your rotor. If yours is stuck on because of rust, mine's not because it's new. But if it is and you're reusing it, then tap between the lug studs. That should break it free off the hub, but just make sure you don't damage the studs. Now we have to get this cap off that hides the axle nut. So take a screwdriver or a pry bar, tap it in here. There we go. Now you should be able to just pry it off of here. Then take a 13mm socket and let's remove the axle nut. At this point, you want to make sure the axle pushes through, which it does, so that's perfect. Next, I want to unbolt the outer tie rod stud off of the knuckle. To do that, you can use a 21mm socket. Now take a hammer and tap the knuckle right here so the tie rod stud can break free. There we go. Remove the tie rod from the knuckle. Now from the back side of the knuckle, you'll see 4 18mm bolts. The 2 other ones are on the other side, but I'm going to get these out first. There's one. 2. And this is why I disconnected the tie rod, because we can easily flip the knuckle over. 2 more on this side. Now you can put the tie rod back in if you want to, so this can stop moving around. Take your hammer and hit the wheel bearing hub assembly till it comes out. I like to wrap the ABS sensor around this so it can actually stay secured. And with this broken free, wiggle it off and slide it out. There's your old wheel bearing. If needed, clean up any debris that got in here. Stuff a couple rags in here because I want to clean up this surface where the wheel bearing sits. You want to make sure it's nice and flat. You don't want any rust built up in there because if there is, it's not going to sit perfectly straight and you'll have issues down the line. Now I'm going to take a very soft and worn out sanding pad You could take a wire brush if yours isn't that bad, or even a sanding block, whatever you have, but I just want to get rid of these raised areas here so that the new wheel bearing, as long as it's not exactly the same shape as the old one, can sit perfectly flat. Now let's add some anti-seize to this surface right here. On the inside, we're going to add grease, but I'm going to do that once the anti-seize is on. Okay, the reason I did that is so that I could add this rag in to prevent anti-seize from going all the way in here. If it gets on this surface a little bit, that's fine. Just wipe it off, but you don't want to pack it in there. There's supposed to be grease in there. Having said that, take some all-purpose grease or wheel bearing grease, whatever you have, and add some in here. Add it to these teeth on the locking hub, on the axle, just everywhere. You want it coated, not just to prevent rust, but obviously this needs to be greased up to function properly, and the locking hub needs to be able to slide on and off smoothly so that you can activate and deactivate your four-wheel drive. Add some to the shaft of the axle. Try not to get it on the threads though. Okay, you don't need a lot. You don't need to pack it in here. That should be plenty. So grab the new wheel bearing, make sure the ABS sensor is facing up, slide it through, and press it on. Make sure the sensor goes behind the backing plate over here, just like that. And just press this on. It's got an O-ring that needs to seat in there. There we go. Now let's get the bolts through. If they have a lot of corrosion built up on the threads, clean them. Mine are good, so I'm just going to slide them in and try to start them on, at least one of them. That way the wheel bearing can stay in place. There we go. That one started perfectly. So I'm gonna start the other ones in. It doesn't matter what sequence you start them in, but when I do tighten them, I do like to do it in a cross pattern so that I can pull this wheel bearing evenly. If I just do one side first, it could sit crooked, and then I'll have other issues. The torque for all these is 129 foot-pounds. Okay, I'm going to go across to the top one on the other side. And since we're here, let's just do this one. And back to the last one. Plug in the vacuum hose for the hub actuator. Make sure it's bottomed out completely. Let's get the tie rod stud back in. Press it down all the way into the knuckle, put the nut on, and we'll torque this to 85 foot-pounds. Put the axle nut on. We'll torque this to 20 foot-pounds after we bottom it out. It's easy to hold the hub at such a low torque. If you can't, just put a pry bar in between. Make sure it's on the flat side so it doesn't damage the threads, and hold the hub from spinning by the pry bar. Put this cap back on. I like to put some grease around the ring here. If you want to put RTV, you can. Tap it in with a rubber mallet, make sure it's nicely seated, and then we'll go ahead and coat them with anti-seize. I also have a new rotor. If you don't have a new rotor, make sure the backside is clean like this one. Sand it down if necessary. Make sure you don't take off too much material though. And then slide it on. It's important that these two sit perfectly flat up against each other. And to secure this, I'm going to use a lug nut to clamp it on. You don't have to make this very tight. Just put it on here by hand so it can hold the rotor and prevent it from falling off. If it falls off and rust gets behind here, it'll sit crooked once it finally gets tightened down. And then you'll have some issues driving down the road, especially at higher speeds. Now let's get the caliper over the rotor, slide it on, start in the two caliper bolts, bottom these out, and then torque them. The torque for these two is 136 foot-pounds. Let's get these reconnected, these brackets here. I'll start with the brake hose, put this back on. This is the 10mm bolt that held it into the knuckle. nice and snug. About 1/8 of a turn after it's bottomed out. Start the ABS wire in. Okay, bottom that out, make sure it's snug. Over here, clip this into the brake hose retainer. Follow the ABS wire and clip this into this bracket over here. Run it behind this brake line. There was one more retainer for it. That has to clip in right over here next to the vacuum hose. And the last part is to plug it in. Make sure that clicks and secure the connector onto the fender liner right there. Let's get the wheel on. Start on all 6 of your lug nuts, bottom them out, and torque them to 150 foot-pounds in a cross pattern. There you have it. Take it for a road test.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.